welcome back. Today we're looking at Philippians, just one verse, Philippians chapter 3 verse 1. And here Paul writes that he says, "Further, my brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord. It's no trouble for me to write the same things to you again, and it is a safeguard for you." I want to take you back to Deuteronomy, and Deuteronomy chapter 11, a little bit of context. So Moses, he's taken the children of Israel out of Egypt. They've spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness because of their parents' disobedience. And so now Moses is leading this generation of people who, many of whom were born in the desert. Perhaps they hadn't seen God through the Exodus work. They hadn't seen his glory and majesty at Mount Sinai. So the book of Deuteronomy is Moses retelling them these stories, these new kids who are about to enter this promised land. And there's this weird little instruction that's in Deuteronomy 11, and it's also repeated at the end of the book, where Moses says, "See, I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you obey the commands of the Lord, your God, that I'm giving you today. And the curse if you disobey the commands of the Lord, your God, and turn from the way I command you today by following other gods." And in Deuteronomy 11 verse 29, Moses actually instructs the people to say, when you go into this promised land, have one person climb up a mountain, Mount Gerizim, and read out all the blessings, and another person go up Mount Ebal and read out all the curses. Now what's God doing here? This sounds bizarre. But in his wisdom, God knows that we need both a warning and an encouragement. See, we need to know the impact of our decisions and the negatives that will come if we choose sin. We know this in our life, and so often perhaps preaching is full of warnings and exhortations, don't do this, don't do this. But we also need these blessings, or perhaps another way of putting it is we actually need to have a bigger love. We need a bigger motivation than a stick over us in case we sin. See, God has created us as perpetual worshippers. That is what the creation story of Genesis just springs forth. And he's also created us as joy seekers. Again, read in Genesis, he makes these trees which are beautiful and pleasing to the eye. Why? Because God loves delight. And a joyless Christianity is not the way of Jesus. God has created us with this desire for joy, but this desire can only be truly found in him. And see, there's two lies, I think, when it comes to this we can be tempted to believe. And one is that a lie that we believe we will find this joy in lesser things. So we think, hey, if I have enough power or pleasure or possessions, they will satisfy me. But the truth is they will never satisfy. You know this. If you've got more money, if you've experienced more pleasures, if you've had more power, all you want is more. You need a higher joy. But the other lie is that any joy is bad. And perhaps some people think, hey, if myself is desiring this false joy from power or pleasure or possessions, we throw the baby out with the bathwater and say the bad thing is actually this desire for pleasure. We assume any joy is bad, and we assume the way forward is to create rules to stop us from settling from lower things and just give up this list of things we can't do. So perhaps your Christianity is full of don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that, don't touch, don't listen. And there's a great intention behind this, but humans are joy seekers, and we're starving for what God has created in us. We need a bigger joy. And this is why Paul here begins by saying, rejoice in the Lord. He's commanding this church, enjoy him. Recognize that he is the gift giver, and all good pleasure comes from him. So turn pleasure into praise. Celebrate him. Smile because he has gifted you with these pleasurable things. And know that even if all your power, all your pleasure, all your possessions disappear, you still have every reason to rejoice because God has gifted you all in Christ. And here's the joy of all of this. I like this. What does Paul say this will do? Paul says it is a safeguard to you. Now we're going to look at more about what this means in the next few weeks. But this is beautiful because Paul is saying here, rejoicing in God is not only what we're created to do, but it also protects us. See, when we rejoice, when we choose to rejoice in him, that is actually the bigger love we need. And as we rest in him, rejoice in him, and choose to celebrate him, this protects our lives from man-made rules that seek to belittle the cross of Christ. So can I encourage you today, why not be a person who decides to turn pleasure into praise? Spend some time thinking about all the good things you're experiencing, but turn those into rejoicing into God. And the other thing is, in your prayers, I'd encourage you to explore prayers of adoration and thanksgiving. Prayers of adoration are when we thank God for who he is. So delight in his character. You could pick one theme, so God's grace, his mercy, his justice. You could pick God's anger and chew on that and thank him for this. But then thanksgiving as well, as we've talked about right at the beginning. Think about all the things you are thankful for and turn these pleasurable things back into praise to him.